It was a dark, blustery evening at the station. Sir Topham Hatt had closed the railway early on account of the weather. The engines were waiting for the signal to return to their sheds.
Maybe one of us should tell a story to help pass the time.
The other engines looked pleased with Thomas's idea.
I have the perfect story for tonight.
James began his story.
A long time ago, there was a brave engine who was always eager to help. Engine, the station master asked one night, would you go to the end of the tracks to pick up a coach that was left behind? Of course, the brave engine replied, and he set out into the dark, foggy night. But by the time the brave engine reached the end of the tracks, the fog was so thick he could hardly see anything. I'll just have to wait till morning, said the brave engine to himself, and he settled into an old shed for the night. Late that night, the brave engine awoke to a noise coming from below the shed. He opened his eyes and saw long fingers reaching for him through the floorboards. There was a monster under the shed. Terrified, the engine raced out of the shed with the engine-eating monster chasing him through the fog.
Then what happened?
That is where the story ends. No one ever heard from the engine ever again.
What about the monster?
Don't be silly, Percy. It's just a story.
What if that story is true? That the engine-eating monster is out there somewhere right now?
Percy asked Thomas on the way to the sheds.
Stop being such a scaredy cat, Percy.
Later that night, after all the engines had settled in for bed, they heard a terrible racket coming from Percy's shed.
Gordon! Thomas! Help! There's a monster in my shed!
Suddenly, James appeared, roaring with laughter. He had been rattling some scrap metal behind the shed to frighten Percy.
Ha ha ha! I'm a monster, ha ha ha!
It's okay, Percy. Sometimes...
You're stupid.
Shut up, James.
No, you shut up.
Good imaginations think bad thoughts.
Stop it, James.
But James was sound asleep.
If it's not James, then maybe I do really have a monster under my shed.
Thought Thomas, and he stayed awake all night just to be safe. Thomas was extremely tired when he found Percy at the docks the next morning.
Did you hear any other strange noises in your shed last night?
Not after James's sleep, Frank.
Now Thomas felt silly himself for staying awake all night. By the middle of the day, Thomas was very sleepy and running far behind schedule. Henry pulled up beside him. You look like you could use some special coal.
Oh, I'm just... a little tired.
Thomas answered. He didn't want anyone to know that he had been too frightened to sleep last night.
What's the matter, Thomas? Monsters keeping you up all night? I cracked myself up.
And James disappeared down the track, laughing loudly. By the end of the day, Thomas had barely any steam left to get back to the yard. The other engines were telling stories again, but Thomas headed straight to bed.
Ah! Who's there? Go away, monster. Get out!
Thomas ordered as he closed his eyes tightly. The noise was getting louder and closer.
That will surely wake the other engines. They'll save me from the monster.
But the other engines didn't stir.
It's just outside the door. There's its head. Help, Gordon.
But only the monster heard Thomas.
It's trying to get in.
Thomas was too frightened to move. He peered out into the dark, and there it was, the horrible engine-eating monster. Thomas clamped his own eyes shut and screamed.
Ah! Gordon, Henry, Percy, James, save me from the monster!
When do you think he'll notice?
Thomas, open your eyes.
What are you laughing at, Gordon? There's a monster right outside my shed.
Not anymore. Now the monster is inside your shed.
Very slowly, Thomas opened one eye.
A hedgehog? I was afraid of a little hedgehog?
Now the engines all laughed. And Thomas laughed with them.
Percy has a good imagination, Thomas. But, I think yours might be just a little better.
I think you're right. It's the only thing in the world that can make a tiny hedgehog into a big, scary monster.
Who turned out the lights?